Just having sight about a thing does not automatically lead you to healing. Having sight about a thing gives you the opportunity to choose insight, to ask questions and become compassionately curious about what you're experiencing.
Welcome to Season 3 of Voices of the Goddess podcast, where we empower, inspire, and uplift women to be the goddesses they truly are. I'm your co-host, Julietta, the magical PT, owner and founder of Body and Soul PT, as well as Soul Candy, intuitive, handmade, and one-of-a-kind jewelry and artwork. I support people in finding the magic within themselves, creating balance in their body and soul.
And I'm your other co-host, Graciela, published, award-winning, and professionally certified portrait photographer specializing in boudoir and personal branding. I create portraits of who you are and not just what you look like so that you can become who you've always been. Join us each week as we sit down for a heart-to-heart chat, sharing stories and insights with listeners across the globe. Laughter and tears alike abound as we access ancient wisdom in modern times through unique and exciting storytelling, supporting you on your life's journey. Welcome to the circle and enjoy the show.
Hi, everybody. We are live again. Hello. Welcome to the show.
Look at all our beautiful fans. How's everybody doing? How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Last week was a crazy, busy week. And I survived it all.
You sure did. I'm still in the afterglow from your magical channeling evening that you had at the studio. I think we need to share a little bit about that.
So that was definitely way outside my comfort zone. And but I embrace doing things outside my comfort zone. So went for it, did it. I think it was well received. What stood out for you from the event, Graciela?
Well, I'm going to tell you that. But first, can you explain to people that might be listening and don't know what that means? Can you just give a little descriptor and tell our audience what that means? Like, what did that event
and channeling can look differently for different people. A lot of people are familiar with Esther Hicks, who channels Abraham. And Abraham kind of comes and takes over her body and speaks through her to her audience. I told my guides absolutely no, I didn't want to do it that way. But so I have some spirit guides that have been communicating with me for many years. And shortly after the beginning of the year, they told me they wanted me to do a live event so that we could share their messages with other people, not just, they chime in my physical therapy sessions all the time, giving messages to people. But this was the first time doing it in a group setting and opening it up for direct questions to them. So it was interesting. It was fun. I'm not going to say it was easy. It was a little, I don't even know what the word is. It was a bit something for me, but
sure. Well, you were doing all the heavy lifting. The rest of us were sitting here just like in awe, listening, looking for the good nuggets of wisdom. What I loved about it the most is that it was very non-denominational. Like, it wasn't a religious experience. It was a just energy, mind opening experience, and the truths, that we talk about that are the same no matter where you come from. Those things continue to be true no matter what part of the world or universe they come out of. And the thing that you said that stuck with me the most, that I ran to write it down, was I think you said love what you want to hate. Gosh, and then
and I didn't say that. They said that. It's to me.
Yeah.
But yeah.
It was just so powerful because, I know we talk about forgiveness and we talk about not holding on to things and moving on and stuff like that. But love what you want to hate, or love what you hate. I guess want to hate. Want is really interesting, right? Because you're supposed to hate something and you're supposed to, be angry with it or whatever. But to love it instead, wow, that's really powerful.
It's it's kind of like leveling up forgiveness, like one more level, and it isn't necessarily making what someone did or making that right. It's just releasing any control that it has over you and diminishing the amazingness of your own life.
You're so right.
So
So right.
And it also feeds into the love is the most healing force in the universe. And so when you see something that's not necessarily from a place of love and light, if you send it love, you help heal that as well.
Yeah. It's loving is like the easiest and the hardest thing to do at the same time, I think. I don't know. Like when we talk about love, it's like, oh, it's so easy. I love everything. But you don't, there's a lot of things that really get you, and with good reason. And can we learn to love those things? I don't know.
When I always look at anything that triggers me, that's an opportunity for me to grow. Like, why is that triggering me? Why am I in resistance to it? And what do I need to shift and heal within myself so that it doesn't trigger me anymore?
Yeah. Well, the goal is happiness, right? However, we can claw that out of this amazing human existence. Speaking of clawing things out, I think I'm going to claw in our little guest. Yes?
Well, we're going to take a little break.
All right, let's take a break and then we'll come back with our guest.
My name is Erin Copeland, and I was the sole caregiver for my husband, Jerry, when he was diagnosed with cancer, underwent multiple surgeries, and a successful liver transplant. I held it all together. I took on all the other duties as assigned, like being chauffeur and the kitchen table pharmacist, and I wouldn't have had it any other way. But it was lonely, it was hard, and there were no resources that actually spoke to me and told the truth about what it was really like to be a caregiver. My best-selling book, Welcome to Caregiving: The Things Caregivers Never Talk About, is not a guide on how to be a caregiver. Instead, it's a thank God I'm not alone book. I'm here to help soften the journey, because there's no right way, there's no wrong way, there's only love. My book is available on Amazon in paperback, ebook, and audiobook versions. You can sign up to receive my weekly newsletter at erincopeland.com. And check the show notes for details on the upcoming Fort Lauderdale live event, because it's all about love.
All right, welcome back. Here we go. Hi, Mandy. Welcome.
Good morning, ladies. How are you?
We are good. Welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I am happy to be alive and grateful that I woke up on time this morning and feeling very good. Thank you.
Yeah, we appreciate that you got up early on your side of the country to be here.
Only early in that I am very lucky to be able to work from home. And so my schedule is my own. I usually get up quite early, but then I do a whole bunch of other things before I decide I should work today. I should do some intentional on behalf of other people work. So
well, speaking of your work, how about if you introduce yourself to our audience and tell them about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I am a trauma-informed certified grief educator and coach. I have written a book about my experience with loss, and as well as the book also touches on the intersection of faith, specifically Christianity and grief, primarily because the church does not know what it's doing and doesn't really know how to handle grievers beyond the initial 2 weeks after a death. So with that book, I launched the Restorative Grief Project. I launched Restorative Grief, my own podcast, as well as a patron private group where we talk about all things loss and integration and how we can find new ways to move forward that are meaningful to us, despite what culture around might be saying. So that is my current focus. 98% of the time is all that different ways of working with grievers.
And just for clarity, from what you're saying, I'm assuming we're speaking of grief in the sense of loss of someone's life, whereas as humans, we can experience grief over loss of anything. It could be loss of a job or loss of, identity, anything. But I'm assuming that we're talking about loss of someone's life.
Well, bereavement and death is associated with death of a human being or a person. Grief is, like you said, it's attached to over 40 or 50 different individual ideals. So missed expectations, a relationship change, a move, a misunderstanding, all of those different things activate grief in our lives in ways we've just normalized and kind of compartmentalized, get through and move on. But my work really centers on helping people recognize the value of metabolizing grief through their whole self, their mind, heart, body, and spirit. So that rather than saying, oh, this is so activating for me because I experienced a loss of a pet at an early age, or we moved when I was a child and now I'm activated by this movie or by having to move again as an adult, they can instead recognize patterns and find themselves in new ways and like coming full circle as human beings now that they've grown and recognize, well, that was grief. No wonder it keeps coming back up. I've never paid attention to it.
Isn't that amazing? We're on autopilot so much. We don't even realize that how we're reacting to things is based in something that has happened to us, right? Like we're not even conscious of that. Right. In your work, the question that we usually ask is like, give me a success story, right? And it's so hard to use the word success with grief because it's hard to feel like you have a win in the grief world. But what is an example of growth and evolution that you've had with your clients that keeps you doing what you're doing? How are you seeing that?
I love that question because I actually think I have wins with clients every day. The idea of learning to metabolize our emotions and our experiences of loss through who we are really started when I was elbow deep in evangelical Christianity and I was a worship leader for 16 years. And during those 16 years, I experienced more losses than I can even articulate. Some of them of friends and family in the church group I was a part of, and some of them just personally. And one thing that I kept running up against and fighting with, because I tend to be someone who pushes back no matter what the concept is, so I can figure it out for myself, was this phrase, sight leads to healing. And it made me angry because sight alone does not bring healing. Sight means we can see what's wrong. And I started likening that to a physician who says, I see you've had a bullet wound. Congratulations. We're going to get you some healing. There's actually insight that's needed in between. And then there's intentionality, action that's required before healing can come. And for me, when I can help a client recognize, or even just a passerby, someone just touristing themselves around my work, when I can help them recognize that just having sight about a thing does not automatically lead you to healing. Having sight about a thing gives you the opportunity to choose insight, to ask questions and become compassionately curious about what you're experiencing, rather than that quick condemnation that we're used to, especially in Western culture, and especially in faith practices, where we tend to unintentionally use shame as the reason or the motivator to move through something. I want to invite people to recognize, actually, it's a great level of compassion for yourself that will allow you to move forward in a way that is lasting, not just in a way that is performative or in the moment or in this week, but in a way that 12 years from now, you can say, I would normally have been really activated by that moment in this movie. But when I started recognizing what that thing did to me, I was able to then pull on all of those tools and all of those techniques and all of that integration work that I've carried over the years so that I can acknowledge, yeah, that pain still exists, but it's no longer overwhelming me like a tidal wave. So, yeah, I mean, there's wins every day. And the difference is helping us realize grief isn't something end. It's something we can learn to exist within without completely compromising the hopefulness and the joy and the peace about who we really are.
Beautiful. And such important work. You know, I'm a physical therapist, but, our emotions do affect the physical function of our body. And if we're not looking at and addressing those as well, the body can never fully heal. So this work is so important. So thank you for doing what you do and supporting people through that journey.
Yeah, I'm actually right now going through a certification program for somatic embodiment attachment therapy, because that work has always been so easily detached from the grief process. And as a PT, you would know, right? People do not pay attention to or recognize clues coming from their body. And it's very popular right now with The Body Keeps the Score and a whole bunch of other doctors writing about this concept. But I find the concept attached to grief so powerful because we have denied that grief exists in our lives. We just find like, oh, I'm really disappointed by that. Okay. Is it attached to something that maybe you've carried for 20 years that could be seen as an old wound or some grief that needed attention 20 years ago? So the somatic approach for me is so grounding because we have this one life, and breath work can be really activating for people. And so when it's available and being able to use it, that's great. But there have to be other ways beyond breath work, I think. And with somatic work, I believe that it's not just breath work, which is great. So because a lot of people are very activated when you say, hey, take a deep breath and or let's do some, they're like, well, I was almost drowned as a child. There's always something that comes along that interrupts this programming that a lot of coaches put into the world. So I really pride myself on being someone who says, well, I don't have any programs, but I am very intent on creating for you and with you, co-creating what is meaningful and what genuinely shows up for you in your grief process, because that's more important than making $50 on an online course or something like that.
All right. Because we're all about women, uplifting women. We're always curious, what is one piece of advice you got from another woman that has impacted your life greatly?
I have a friend of mine who asks me all the time, why are you listening to that? I have a tendency to be very, I love to collect input, and I love to, like I said earlier, push back on things that don't seem quite right. But speaking of old wounds, little me really needed validation, really needed affirming that I was on the right path, that I was doing the right thing, that I was really living my life above reproach. So people would see me and say, yeah, well done. And a lot of that is definitely programming from faith practices over the years that needed me as a leader to be someone people would listen to. And so this woman constantly asking me, every time I see them, will say, well, why are you listening to them? And it's not a criticism. It's a question for me to sit with. Why am I listening to that? Do they have permission to direct my life? Do I value their opinion because they also affirm what I'm doing and who I am and where I'm going? And it's given me incredible freedom to recognize, let them talk. I don't need to listen to them, or they're not actually talking to me. I'm just centering myself in their narrative because it feels familiar, but it's honestly a wound that really just keeps derailing me from the path I'm on. And so that's one of my favorite current pieces of advice.
It's a really good point of awareness, right? Where you kind of just do a little quick stop and check in with yourself, right? So much we don't even realize half the things that we're feeling and that we're the one giving it power, right? Because if someone were to do a drive-by and yell something out the window, you wouldn't give it any purpose, any power at all, right? But in a different circumstances, you do. So how do we make that distinction? And it's all within us, right? It's all coming from us, one way or the other. I think that we fail to grasp the incredible ability that we have to create the life that we want. In every way, in every aspect, everything, right? We really can, there's memes about it now that it's I could be living, in a tree off the grid, but instead I'm sitting here paying my bills, right? We really do have an unending amount of freedom, limitless, right? Yeah. And the fact that, sometimes we accidentally give away our power and give power to those types of statements. It's just really interesting. It's interesting that it takes an awareness,
It does. There's this great concept. I can't remember who developed it, but it's a positive psychology concept that stays away from, I guess I'll just give you a disclaimer, is I'm very, very careful around positivity because toxic positivity is really, really rampant in grief work. People get really inspired by their own stories and go into the work and try to purpose out of pain people to death, so I'm very cautious when I even approach positive psychology just because the pop culture version of it is very distorted. But that said, there's this great map of consciousness. It's like an upward spiral. And it talks about how the energy levels that you're functioning within, like the energetic frequency that you're within, is the highest energetic frequency is enlightenment and peace, and the lowest is apathy, shame, and guilt. And grief is right above, like grief, fear, and desire are like right above apathy, shame, and guilt. And as you say that, I think about how the way I was raised culturally within faith practices was spoken that there was a lot higher energetic frequency, and that obviously was not the language used, but this idea that we move out of love for others, out of love for self, out of love for our faith practice, out of love for God. But the reality was that there was a lot of shame being used and guilt being used to drive change in who we were and how we were showing up on behalf of others, or are we not showing up on behalf of others enough? And it traumatized me in a way that even as this person now who is educated and articulate, and I love that I misspoke on articulate. That is so
Oh, look at you just being a real person. It's amazing.
I'm going to put that in my pocket right now as a little human moment to come back to, because that's so funny. But it just reminds me that like the way that I've moved through the world has not served me well, not because it was necessarily bad, because I try to avoid good and bad, but it wasn't helpful. And it was only helpful in the season I was in. But now that I have evolved beyond that season, I don't want to bring with me those poor tools that continue to try and take me back to that season. And yeah, so it's interesting how we shift over time and start to recognize, well, wait a minute, what is it that if enlightenment and peace and joy and love and rationality are these things that really lead us forward, how do we engage those and still have human moments and still not use those to shame or treat ourselves badly in order to evolve or try to find healing? And that's a conversation. That's a whole nother conversation. I could go down it for a very long time. But anyway, what you were saying about it.
Julietta and I recently were having the conversation about what does it mean to live a fully authentic life. And we were, kind of tossing around the word joy. And then we kind of tossed it out because joy is only a portion of the human experience. It is not the definition of the human experience, right? So being joyful is wonderful, but it's also just as valid to be sad. It's just as valid to feel all the feelings, even the ones that don't, get Hallmark greeting cards. It sounds like you've done lots of homework. And I want to ask you, because in my world here, I'm building a library. This is my mission in life. And so what is a book that you've read that you wish all goddesses would read? What would you recommend?
This is a very loaded question. I'm going to assume you mean fiction or nonfiction over fiction, right?
It can mean whatever you want it to mean. What is a book that just you think everyone should read?
I mean, my book, obviously, actually, that's not true.
It can't be true.
I will say I actually discourage people with like religious trauma not to read my book because it has that framework all the time. So it's not my book. I just read like 100 books a year, but I will pick one that I love so much that I have right here called The Space Between Us. It's a John O'Donohue collection of blessings, or to bless the space between us, because it is they're just written like short poems. And I really think that we spend a lot of time trying to understand the world around us through logic, which there's nothing wrong with it. But there is a limit to what our mind can comprehend. And knowing that we are whole people, mind, heart, body, and spirit, means we have to give credence in the same type of love and attention and healthy support to each part of us. And for that one, for me, it allows my mind to take a break and to let my spirit not take the front seat, but to express itself and to feel relief in a way that does not have a religion attached to it. I think that, kind of just going off of the shame thing, there's so many things that we've put on ourselves or tried to do to refine or build up our spirit or mature our experience of the world, mature our religious show up, whatever it is. And it can be really to our detriment because we're not recognizing our tendency in the West to perform at the same time. And what I learned about myself over the last 20 years is that performance is the one thing that leaves me completely empty. It's not about the authentic life for me, actually, because I think that word has been hijacked in a lot of ways. I think I want to be authentic, but I want to be authentic to what I actually want. And I don't always know what I want. So for sometimes being authentic, just be like, I don't know, but I'm just going to let them talk. I have no idea. But that book has been really encouraging for me. There are days when I can sit back and he was an Irish Catholic theologian, I think. But that doesn't even matter. It's similar to like the Rumi poetry for me. It just allows me to soften in places where I want to have answers and control. And I've used it many times with clients where I was like, I see there's a lot going on. Let's just end here. And I want to read this to you. And if you hate it, tell me you hate it. And I won't do it. I don't take it personally. But if you like it, I'll send you a copy of this piece, just because I think that there's a lot of softness that's available to us through poems like that. Just little short blessings that are an offering of compassion to ourselves.
I love that. And we're so caught up in this 3D that we're human. And, as humans, we have to do all these things, and we're not. We're, the soul inhabiting this meat sack. And the more we can connect with the soul and realize like so much of what we are doing as human is just ridiculousness, and being able to be free of that and let that go is such a gift.
Yeah, that performative nature has to drop off so that we can really integrate the reality of like, who is me? Who is Mandy? Who am I in my deepest parts that are really want attention, that want to be part of the whole? And how do I honor that whole self without just becoming hyper-focused? Because that's what we're good at. We're hyper-focused on health, on wellness, on physical wellness, on activities, or hyper-focused on what we're eating or the things that we're reading or the concepts. And to be fair, we need to pick like one road to run down at a time. But if we can bring it back into connecting it back to the whole and acknowledge the parts of us that don't make sense or that are disparate or that have bigger pain points and bring some compassion to them, it really allows us, like you said, to acknowledge like, yeah, the body matters. It's so crucial. But at the end of the day, it's just as ephemeral as everything else. What is lasting? What is important? Not what is legacy in this world, because I think we can get a little obsessed about legacy as well. But what is the lasting impact that I have as an energetic being who, I don't know about you guys, but every time I think about the fact that I'm like, I'm just vibrating energy that happens to have sentience. This is so wild. My brain, what? Like it just turns off because I can't function. It's so astounding to me that we, like you said, have just minimized ourselves, our being, down to a set of instructions and tasks that we have to accomplish, when, the people who are probably freest in the world might have a routine that they stick to, but what they really stick to is this experience of self. They're people who are willing to like say, none of what we're focused on, at least in the West, matters. None of what we are obsessed with learning really has lasting impact. It's going to influence maybe who we are today. But if we don't integrate it, it's just an episode of a sitcom. It's done and we move on from it. Powerful.
I feel like this whole episode here is just full of like powerful oomph, and I hope our listeners are enjoying what they get to take away from this. Our next question for you, Mandy, is, we all have to, well, we don't have to, we take risks sometimes and make choices that might be exciting and scary at the same time. And we don't know what the outcome's going to be, but what is something that you've done that you will never regret?
That's a really good question. I think I will never regret becoming a mom. We had a lot, and that sounds funny because like, who would regret becoming a parent? Plenty of people. But we had a lot of fertility issues in our marriage. We've been together for 16 years now, and our child is 8. And for probably 4 or 5 years, we were trying to become pregnant and couldn't. And so she was a miracle / surprise. We were totally shocked. And despite having a really easy pregnancy, I was really anxious the whole time because of all of the things leading up to it. So, in the aftermath, I don't know how many miscarriages I've had. I don't know. I know I've had some since. It just has been something that has been such a source of pain anytime it's brought up, even with my child constantly asking for siblings as they do. And me trying to explain like, listen, siblings are really not overrated, but like at your age, they're not what you think they will be. It's not built-in best friends. It is hard, and you're a lot older than any child would be anyway. But I think I won't regret it, not because now that we have a child and things are like fine, right? I never saw myself as someone who only had one child and then focused on career. I saw myself when I was younger as a mom of like 5 or 6 with this huge home that everyone would come back to 25 years later with their own families, and every holiday, like I had the quintessential huge family American dream. And as I realized that wasn't happening, I really had to wrestle with, well, did I want to be a mom at all? Or did I just want what I thought was meaningful as a parent? And that's not to say anything about my daughter. She's cooler than I am. She's smarter than I am. She's someone that I cannot like get enough of. But I still would have moments where I'm like, well, is this what I wanted? Yeah. And I have to sit with it every time and truly choose that, remembering that even in my like lowest moments of being a parent, even when I was having, I had undiagnosed PPD as well, postpartum depression. And it was hard. It was so hard, but it's not something I would ever trade, even though it was one of the hardest seasons of my life.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you're sharing that. And I think honestly, what you're describing is the human condition, you know, all the ups and downs and all the feelings all at the same time. And, you know, the expectations that you set up for yourself and then released, like that's the joy in the releasing of those expectations, you know, and if there's a layer of grief in there, then there is. And like you said, you work through that and come out the other side, you know, like I think that's beautiful. You know, I don't think life always works out the way we think it should, not because life is a bad thing that never turns out the way you want. It's the problem's at the beginning. It's the expectations that we're setting that's incorrect, quote unquote, right? It's everything else is flowing as it should, right? When you're in the flow, that's when it feels good.
I love flow. I actually this year gave myself a little mantra for the year that says slow is fast, flow is best, and no is yes, so that I can say those 3 things to myself and remember I'm in pursuit of the slow life because I'm usually at 100 miles an hour. I am in pursuit of flow because when I'm not in a flow state, no matter what I'm doing, I'm pretty agitated and just trying to find that space. And we've all experienced that. And then saying no to people. Oh man, it's so much better to say yes by saying no, and getting comfortable with discomfort of disappointing people is not easy. And I say that as someone who, you know, I kind of see disappointing people as an opportunity to educate if I have access, right? So why are you attached to my outcome? Why do you care so much if I'm involved or doing what you think I should? But that flow state, it is something really important. And I think there's those attachments we have to our expectations. Buddhist principle, right? Attachment is suffering. I go back and forth because I'm like, attachment is powerful and helpful. So is suffering. But what if I don't want either? What then? How do I even, and then my brain breaks again. And so I have to think about something like easy kittens or I don't know. Yeah, it's an interesting expectation is something that I think people don't give themselves credit for when they start to grieve as much as they should. And I don't want to say should. Let me take that back. As much as they have access to be able to grieve an expectation, I want to invite them into that, not because I think our expectations are harmful. I think they set us up for things that we might not actually want. And the more that we can figure out who we are, what our core values are, and where we want to go in life is where we can actually say, this expectation fits, this expectation is real, or, oh God, this one came from my community, my family, my culture, my historical perception of what life should be. But it's, people do just, man, we've got a lot of expectations to grieve.
Listen, the human life, it takes a little bit of effort.
Yeah.
I love the work that you're doing.
My name is Erin Copeland, and I was the sole caregiver for my husband, Jerry, when he was diagnosed with cancer, underwent multiple surgeries, and a successful liver transplant. I held it all together. I took on all the other duties as assigned, like being chauffeur and the kitchen table pharmacist, and I wouldn't have had it any other way. But it was lonely, it was hard, and there were no resources that actually spoke to me and told the truth about what it was really like to be a caregiver. My best-selling book, Welcome to Caregiving: The Things Caregivers Never Talk About, is not a guide on how to be a caregiver. Instead, it's a thank God I'm not alone book. I'm here to help soften the journey because there's no right way, there's no wrong way, there's only love. My book is available on Amazon in paperback, ebook, and audiobook versions. You can sign up to receive my weekly newsletter at erincopeland.com. And check the show notes for details on the upcoming Fort Lauderdale live event, because it's all about love.
We're getting towards the end, and so I just want to ask you one last question. If you would share with us, and it can be related or unrelated to your work and your life, just give us one of your sweetest, most delicious memories, just something good that we can walk away with and take some pleasure in as we close out the episode.
When my husband and I were just my husband and I, we took a very good long road trip to Glacier National Park. I live in the Northwest, and so it was a solid, I think, 16-hour drive to the park from where we are. And one of the days we were driving through, because we just stayed outside in a campground in like a stilted yurt, and then would drive in every day. And we decided, let's go find a lake and dive in. And I don't remember which lake we were at, but we were down at the water. It was like a short hike down, and there was no one anywhere. And this was height of summer. So I remember thinking, like, this is wild that there's no one else here, but let's go. So we swam out, and it was perfectly clear. You've seen the pictures probably of the lakes at that park that are just crystal clear to the bottom and like rainbow colored rocks everywhere. That is the lake we were swimming in. And we were probably a good 100, 200 feet away from shore. And it was stunning. And we were just swimming about. And all of a sudden we see people start to come down. I was like, oh, idyllic setting compromised by humans. Bummer. And we noticed they were dressed really formally, like maybe they'd just been driving through from an event and like stopped to see the lake. But more of them were coming down, and there were probably like 20 people, and they were carrying a table and some chairs. I'm like, what is happening? And at one point, there was a woman that came down in a bridal gown, and I realized they are getting married by our stuff. We're in the background of their wedding, and this guy turns out and just yells, "Don't worry, you stay where you are. We'll tag you in the photos on Instagram." And we're like, okay, yeah, okay. So we just swam out in the lake and watched this couple's wedding. And it was such an interesting and just funny piece of like a human experience to be able to say, like, that was a huge marked moment that we got to witness for people. And it was meaningful for them to be out in this beautiful space. It was meaningful for us to be there. And it was one of those vacations where I don't know that we'd ever taken that many days off in a row together since getting married, maybe ever. I think it was our longest vacation ever. And we lost track of time and the days. And it was just, we all need space to forget where we are, what day or time it is, and just actively just, who cares if we're in a wedding? Good for them. They're going to have this story. I hope they're in the world somewhere telling this story. Oh, we got married at the lake, and there were this couple out in the water, and someone said stay there, so they did. I couldn't believe they stayed there. Like, move.
Hey, with any luck, they'll be one of our podcast guests in the future.
I hope so. I'm desperate. I will tell you, I know it's supposed to be over. I have one other story that is very similar to that. It's like this kismet, one of my very best friends to this day, and I met in college. Before we met, I was in the hallway talking to a friend of ours who ended up being a mutual friend, and he told me he was mad at me or something, or I was upset, and he was trying to calm me down. And my friend said, "Don't," and stop. And I immediately just started singing "Thinking About Tomorrow." And like, that was our little moment. And then this stranger walked by going down the hall, "Don't stop, you're already there," like singing the next line. And I shouted, "Oh my God, musicals are real. Like, this is incredible." And a year later, I was hanging out with this new group of friends, and this guy starts telling this story about this time in the hallway when he saw a musical. And I turned, I'm like, that was me. Or,
wow.
Oh my God. We found each other. And to this day, every time one of us will tell that story, everyone around him is like, yeah, we've heard this 8 times. I'm like, I'm sorry. Do you have a magical real life musical moment? Then celebrate ours, because they really happen.
That's beautiful.
Anyway, I hope I do find that couple. I hope they're still together. I hope they like swimming. Anyway.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on our show today, Mandy. It's been wonderful having you, and you shared incredible insights for our audience. So Thank you again.
Yeah,
So
I'm
many good
grateful.
juicy nuggets today.
Thank you.
All right, listeners, we love you. We'll see you soon.
Bye.
Thank you, dear ones, for joining us today. Make sure you check out the show notes for details on how to get in touch with either Julietta, Graciela, or today's special guest. Don't forget to subscribe, review, like, and share.
Big love and gratitude for all of you. May the path before you be ever illuminated by your fellow goddesses. Shine bright and have a magical day.